was interested in chemical carcinogens associated with pulp mills and stuff, and I became very familiar with cancer-causing chemicals because I was also involved in pesticide approvals in the Fish and Wildlife branch. I was involved in pesticide approvals in the Fish and Wildlife. Okay, could you turn the camera on, please? And press the little red button. I'm going to record this so I can put it on YouTube and get the information out to the rest of the world. Yeah, you make sure that screen is in the frame.
Yeah.
Just catch me on the edge of the camera.
Right.
You want to get the top of the screen as well?
Okay. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it has you in the screen.
Okay, did you press the red button?
Yes, I already did.
Okay, it's going. Good. Okay, so let's start the slideshow. I call this catching cancer because these organisms, you catch these organisms, literally. You get infected by them, and they initiate cancer. And some of them can lead to tumors, and some of them are quite bad. And so it's really behooves us to know these creatures and these viruses and look for strategic ways to reduce them in our lives. If we can prevent getting them or prevent their illnesses, then that's certainly a better way than having to do a treatment for chemotherapy or something afterwards.
Can you put the speaker closer to your mouth?
Yes, I can. How's that? I might be able to turn up the volume here. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
That's better. That's better.
Okay. Okay, so there are viruses and bacteria and helminths, basically worms, that can cause cancers. And we don't have to worry too much about the worms here, but if you travel to tropical countries, it behooves you to know about them. If you're involved in immigration, you want to know that people can be transporting them here. And I'm starting to suspect that one of them, Schistosoma japonicum, can possibly settle here in the Okanagan and survive here one day with global warming. Okay, so let's get started. No, it's not changing for me. I'll get the box worked out. There we go. I dedicate this to my son. I lost him in 2000. He was a PhD molecular endocrinologist, the world's leading expert on the prostaglandin F2 alpha, and it was very tragic. So I'm dedicating this talk to him. There are many things that cause or promote cancer, and our history, our personal history of exposure and susceptibility varies from person to person. And so it's very hard to use epidemiology to say that this causes that for certain, because we all have a different history. And so it's almost like the perfect crime, because you can never actually say which one of these caused that mutation, and so on and so forth. But we know carcinogens cause cancer. And that's something we do know, and we know a good deal about them. So people are exposed to many of these pathogens. They do damage to our bodies, and it's multifactorial. I've just said that. Genetics plays a big role as well. Some people have at least 1,000 times greater risk of cancer than other people. If you have scleroderma, for example, you have 1,000 times higher risk of cancer. If you have a depressed immune system from some other disease or from organ transplants, then you're susceptible. There's also synergies, that is, drugs, pesticides, and microbes interact with each other to make things worse. And drugs are in that as well. And there's also epigenetic on-off switching. We've now discovered that epigenetics will turn off genes that we need to protect ourselves, and it'll turn on bad genes that will facilitate cancer. So every cancer we're finding now has a genetic and an epigenetic component. Okay, and human endogenous retroviruses we have viruses in our bodies, in our genome, which form 8% of our genome. And that's like 25 million base pairs. Not pairs, but bases. That's huge. And we picked those up all through our evolutionary history from when we were fish and before that even. I found retroviruses in flagellates, and one of our evolutionary organisms when we were evolving was a coronal flagellate. So these viruses have tremendous antiquity, and they've been entering our bodies and going into our genome. So we are part virus. Be advised that you are part virus. Okay, so these are the bugs, the viruses and worms and bacteria that I have identified as being the bad boys. And I'll deal with them one by one. And the global impact of them is enormous. It's at least 2 million cancer cases in 2008. It would probably be about 3 million cancer cases today just from these infections. You can see that in sub-Saharan Africa, 32.7% of the cancers are caused by these organisms. So infections lead to way more cancers in the sub-Saharan Africa region. And what that means is that those people, when they're migrating here, they're bringing these viruses with them. And they're going to increase our load, our population load of pathogens that are carcinogenic. And you can see that in the developed world, they only form 7.4%. So globally, they're a huge problem. And now I have made a list of important sites to visit on the internet to get information on these organisms and on what is carcinogenic. And I have some DVDs here with that information on it. So I have copies of my lecture, and there's few of you enough here that I can give you all one. So this is the list that the International Agency for Research of Cancer has identified. Type 1 is a human carcinogen, absolutely proven, confirmed. You can see H. hepatitis viruses B and C are both confirmed. 2 is a probable carcinogen, and 2A is probable and 2B is possible. 3 is not classifiable, but it may be. 4 is not carcinogenic. There's no 4s in this list. Okay, so the hepatitis viruses are nasty. Papilloma viruses, you can see HPV-16 is the worst of the lot. This is the one that causes cervical cancers the most, and 18 as well. But cervical cancers are certainly one of the nasty cancers caused by papilloma viruses. Continued, all of these are linked to cervical cancers. So there's a huge number, and the beta hepatitis virus 5 and 28 are involved in skin cancers. Alpha HPV 6 and 11 is a 3, which is possible, and so are the other HPV types. Then we have polyoma viruses, the JCV, John Cunningham virus. It's not, we haven't given it a classification, but it causes central nervous system and colorectal cancers. The molluscum contagiosum virus, skin cancer, Merkel skin cell, SV40, malignant mesothelioma, but also a lot of other cancers we've identified recently. Herpes viruses, Epstein-Barr virus is the worst. Epstein-Barr virus is the mumps virus, the one you get from kissing disease, right? So that's the nasty one. And if you've got kids in high school getting mumps, then they are predisposed to cancers later in life. So that's one that we really need to be more serious about in terms of keeping kids out of school when they've got it, in terms of trying to reduce infections in the population. Epstein-Barr virus is also known as HHV1, human herpes virus number 1. It's an immunosuppressor. It causes a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and nasopharyngeal carcinomas of the nose, so it's pretty nasty. And then there's Kaposi sarcoma. You normally have to have AIDS to get this. It doesn't usually appear without being associated with HIV. But it's a definite human carcinogen. HTLV is human T-cell lymphotrophic virus. Leukemias, lymphomas, Kaposi sarcoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Hodgkin's lymphoma, cervical cancer, anus, and conjunctiva. HV2 is Kaposi sarcoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. HER6, K is human breast cancer. Okay, I haven't even put that on my list because I've got 6 other ones that cause breast cancer or are linked to breast cancer. I'm not saying they cause breast cancer, but are associated with it. Helicobacter, the bacteria, the worst is Helicobacter pylori, which is the one that we've associated with ulcers. If you've had ulcers, then you're at a risk later in life of getting cancer in your stomach or bowel cancer, actually colon cancer. It's also linked to that. Streptococcus bovis, I've added this. It's a colorectal cancer risk factor. I would give it a 2A. That's my own level after reviewing the data. Salmonella, gallbladder cancer, Bartonella species, vascular tumors, and gut microbiome fusobacteria have been linked to colon cancer and cancers of the gastrovascular system. And chlamydia monas